So if you're in a position to assist us to streamline your this issue, please do help us. We appreciate all the help. Last time we got advice from Dr. Raj and it helped us. So thank you so much for that. So today we're going to have a very interesting conversation with Dr. Gidua about our cultural practices. It's a very interesting topic. So Dr. Gidua, hello.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, let me let you start this session and then
Okay.
we are here to learn. Karibu.
Asante Sana. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalondu. Thank you so much, Dr. Kinuthia and the rest of the team from KNH. And thank you to all the healthcare workers who are actually logged on. I'm very, very privileged this afternoon to be taking us through one of the three series that we talked about. The first in the series was about how to use non-pharmaceutical interventions during a pandemic and what we've seen in Kenya. The next one we talked about was about how to manage mental health disorders, and especially during the pandemic, and sustaining that throughout the pandemic and after the pandemic. And so today, as Dr. Kalondu has said, I think that will talk about one of the things that I think is the biggest intervening factors, and even as the world is talking about what to do with COVID-19, I don't think that people have looked a bit closer and closely about what culture and spirituality have to offer. So for us to do that, let me share my screen and we'll go through it. All right, there we go. I believe we can see it now, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, good. So today we shall look at it this way. I know you're starting to get used to my format and the format that we've been using. The one thing I learned was that once we have something standard, it's easier for people sometimes to relate and also to follow, as opposed to being very different each time. And I think that this will actually help us today as we move on. So what we're going to do, we'll do a bit of an introduction, we'll talk about our context, then we'll investigate about a bit about culture and a bit about spirituality, and then we'll talk about what happens during a pandemic such as this one. How is it affecting our culture, and how is our culture affecting it? Because I think it works both ways, and I think that both of them affect each other in that kind of direction. It's not one that only affects the other, but both of them actually work with each other. We'll also talk about spirituality as well, and how it affects the pandemic and how the pandemic is affecting spirituality. The best thing, I think, even before we move on, that I think about this is that you being healthcare workers, you have actually been dealing with Kenyans and with other people, of course, throughout your practice, who come from very specific cultures, very specific spirituality and spiritual orientations. And so therefore, basically today is a discussion with the choir, because you're the guys who've been on the ground, and you're the ones who know how it affects people. For instance, if somebody is in an accident, a car accident, and then they bleed, then they get a traumatic injury, and then they bleed out a lot and they need some units of blood. And then once you go and start saying that we need to put this person in emergency transfusion or whatever it might be, then they come and tell you, by the way, in our culture, we don't do it. As a medical and a healthcare worker, what do you do? How do what goes through you? Because you have to balance between respecting the person's culture as well as saving lives, which is the oath that you've taken for the most part. So I think these are some of the questions we're going to be addressing today, because I think that COVID-19 has come to challenge the whole world at the same time. Most of the other pandemics that we've seen in the world didn't affect everybody at the same time, apart from, of course, the Spanish flu, HIV. And for example, like HIV took a longer time, so people had a reaction time and to start dealing with it. But for COVID, as well as any other influenza type pandemic, they seem to spread very, very fast. And so before our cultures can respond in the way that COVID might require, we're already responding just the way our culture responds naturally. So we'll investigate some of those things, and hopefully we'll learn from each other. I'm by no means the expert, as I told you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Oscar Gidhu. I'm a forensic psychologist. I'm also the chair of the Kenya Psychological Association. But we've been doing this in conjunction with Kenyatta National Hospital, as well as the National Counterterrorism Center, who've been gracious enough to say, you know what, let's work with our healthcare workers. And Kenyatta having this platform, I think you guys are very privileged to be working together on such a thing like this. I want to also say again, thank you for your hard work under these very impossible circumstances, and hopefully we can spend some time that will really help us to find a way forward. Thank you so much. So again, as I said, it's not my own work alone. We worked as a team with Professor Lukoya Tuoli, whom you know very well, and is a member of the fraternity, has been with us, spoke about the grief and stigma very articulately, and I enjoyed his presentations really well, and I think that everyone else did as well. There's of course Dr. Boniface Chitai, then Dr. Alfred Gitonga, who's actually supposed to be the lead in this paper, and also Dr. Simon Njuguna, Dr. Lynette Ongeri, and finally Dr. Frank Njenga. And all of them are psychiatrists, and it was really interesting for us working on this. And we've been having good sessions that are vibrant, really investigating what is the role of culture, spirituality on COVID-19 as it goes on. We're playing the role of observers, and we're trying to see, can we intervene in any way? Is there anything we can do? And is there something that could be done a bit better? Also, as we get into this, I want to remind everybody that the Mental Health Task Force, which we also belong to, launched the report about 3 weeks ago, or 3.5 weeks ago. Feel free to download it. I'll give a link to where you can download it and read it and see if we might have a good blueprint for the country when it comes to mental health for our people. So again, we know what's happening in the world, and I'm not going to bore us with the details of how the virus started spreading around the world and where it is right now. We are seeing numbers. We've seen a lot of interventions. I'm so happy we dealt with the non-pharmaceutical interventions, because that word lockdown, I don't think it's been said as many times in the world as it has been said since March. There are countries that started with a lockdown, then what they called a total lockdown. Then they opened up again, and then now they've seen a resurgence of cases. Now they're locking down again. For us in our country, we've seen what happened once the cessation of movement was stopped. We also saw a surge in numbers, and now we're trying to cope with it in very different kind of ways, starting with what we discussed last week. I don't know if you remember, we talked about alcohol and the sale of alcohol being reduced, and I saw that they did not do a complete shutting down of that, but what they did is a partial one, which talks about serving it in restaurants as well as in bars. I think that's a good move. Let's see how it will work for us in the next 30 days. So let's talk about Kenya, because here's where we live, and we have a story that is not as simple as people imagine. Because when we talk about culture and we talk about spirituality in Kenya, the mistake that Kenyans make, and the mistake that people make all the time, even when you look at any political discussion or any appointments into national offices or anything, people seem to focus on a thing called tribe. Tribe. I want you to hang on to that word, and I want us to see if after today's presentation, anybody will identify by a tribe or people will be identifying by their culture. Are we together? I want you to hang on to that, because those are two very, they might be related, but they're not exactly the same thing. Because I can promise you that what people think a tribe is not necessarily what a culture is. And what people think a culture is not necessarily what tribe might be. Okay, so we'll explore that and see how that can actually come into play, even as we move on with deciding what to do for our country. So in Kenya, we are now aware that the population in Kenya is about 53.5 million Kenyans as of July 2020. July is ending tomorrow. So next week we might actually go up by a few 100,000 or by a few thousand, but that's where we stand. If we do not also know, we are the 27th most populous country in the world. I don't know if people knew that, but Kenya was 33rd, I think, just last year. And now we've gone up a few more steps. They're saying that we are more fertile. People are giving birth at younger ages. The efforts for birth control don't seem to be bearing fruit. And unfortunately, from the reports that we've seen, also from the pandemic and the lockdowns, we have higher instances of underage pregnancies and younger people getting pregnant out of relationships which might not be conducive for raising children. Now, am I judging the age that people are giving birth? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that as a consequence of what has been happening, our birth rate seems to have gone higher somehow. I don't know if it's related to the reports we saw from the education department or if it's something different, but it's just good for us to understand that. Also, did we know that more than 40% of Kenyans are under the age of 15 years old? I just want us to think about that. None of the people on this call, Dr. Kalonji, you can correct me if I'm wrong, none of us is in that category. And if we are, that's interesting. But I just think that, that should tell us something about, even as we start crafting the idea of what culture is, think about the makeup of who Kenyans are. More than 40% under the age of 15. When you add just 10 years, 61% of Kenyans are under the age of 25. We really, really, really must think deeply about that. More than 61%. So that means that if I was to even dare go to about 35, I know that that number would tell me about 72%. So if you're not youth and you're not eligible to receive those, what is it called? Uwezo Fund, the fund for youth. If you're not in that group, there's a whole different question about where we fit into this culture of Kenyans today. So if we start by asking how many cultures do we have in Kenya? So many people might start talking about tribe. Oh, we have X number of tribes. And in fact, there's a tribe that had never been acknowledged and now they've been put in. And now we have 47, 48, 49, 50 tribes in Kenya. And that's where they end. Today, I'm going to submit that we don't only have those tribal cultures that people want to identify with, especially when you look at somebody's last name, you automatically assume where they come from, and which might not be true all the time. So there are many ways we can split the concept of culture. Think about urban versus rural culture. The experience of someone who lives in Majengo versus somebody who lives in Bargatoi. Or Baragoi, what is that? Or Baringo, what does that look like? Okay. And not urban Baringo, I'm talking about rural. Okay. Think about things like ethnicity, meaning that yes, there's that concept of tribe, but there's also the question of intermixing, people have mixed so much ever since time immemorial, so we don't even know if there's any pure ethnicity anymore. Then the question of generations. Think about our grandparents and the people who are in the 90s and 80s year old, and think about the people in their 70s and 60s, people who are older adults. Think about people in their middle age, anybody in between the age of 40 and maybe 55, around there, or 60. Think about the people who are in their emerging adulthood or in their adulthood. So we have many stratifications of generation. And in fact, the other day I was laughing with a friend of mine. We had a song, and I can promise you we could not even understand 2 words in that song apart from the beats. That's the only thing we could hear. But then that's when we laughed and we said, clearly we're not from that generation. That's already a cultural difference that you can see just caused by that function of age. We don't speak the same language, and it's not about tribe, it's just about age and when we were born. Also, the other question of location. When children or even people from Northeastern, are they the same as people from the coast, for instance, or people from Nairobi or in other adjacent counties? And we have to ask that not because of judging or stereotyping anything, but just asking about daily experience. When people wake up in the morning, what do they see? What do they experience every day? And that might actually have an impact on what their cultural expression might be or what their spiritual expression might also be. Of course, the biggest splitter of all, gender. When you imagine that there is a culture, there's a male culture and there's a female culture as well, and it's not only just the same. So imagine and split it across those other functions that we've talked about: urban, rural, ethnic, ethnic, generation-wise, location, and all those. And I'm sure that there are many other ways we can actually split this concept of culture to be able to understand how complex our story as Kenyans really is. So if I was to ask a Kenyan and I say, what is Kenyan food? Already we are confused, isn't it? When I say what is a Kenyan dress, we attempted one. We attempted one in the 90s, which has never been resurrected again. And so we start finding that because of how complex we are, we don't have what we can call a unifying culture, or what we can call this is our unifying culture. For the people who've been working on national matters, we realize that maybe that is also because we don't have what we can call and we can define as national values. We don't have values, and we say as Kenyans we believe in 1, 2, 3, or as Kenyans we believe in 3, 4, 5. We prefer to believe them at either our local levels, our tribal levels, our family levels, or even our congregational levels, based on what we believe or what we worship, or who we worship every week. So that's the other question we lead to. How many spiritual expressions do we have, including those of organized religion? If you think about the big religions, from the data book that I was reading earlier before preparing this presentation, I saw that we are now ranked at about 85.5 Christian, and then 10.9% Muslim, and then we have a few other religions, and even animists, and all, of course, atheists, and all of that. But then the question becomes, even within that 85.5%, what are we saying? There's Roman Catholics, there's evangelical, there's Protestants. So even when we say religion, we don't mean the same thing. So there are as many religions as there are Kenyans or cultural expressions of the same religion. Because even when you say Christian, do you mean the same thing when you go to Marsabit, for example, or versus when you go to inside like in Nakuru, for example? Is it the same thing? So we have to also, even as we move on, realize that when we start talking about culture, when we start talking about religion, we are not necessarily referring to the same thing. And unless somebody defines it deeply for you, you might actually be talking about two very different concepts. Are we together so far?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Kalundu. I like that you're always there to support and to reply. I like that. Thank you so much. So, okay, let's continue. So the other thing is about the expression of grief and loss. The reason I've brought this in here, and at a bit of a deviation from the actual paper that we worked on, is because pandemics bring with them a large expression of grief as well as loss, or an experience of grief and loss. In the beginning of the pandemic in March, we fortunately had not lost anybody, and we started talking about the way, remember all those narratives about Africans have good, strong immunities, we have the BCG shot, so we are good. So what happened was everybody was very happy that we're not contracting the disease and that nobody was really dying. But what has happened over the last few weeks is that you're starting to see cases of people losing their lives. But even before we go to the loss of life, we are thinking about the loss of the economy, the loss of jobs, the loss of community expression with people, the loss of all these cultural expressions. Can you imagine all those colorful weddings that people had been attending? Now you're told you can only have 15 people in them. You can also imagine even the expression of grief and loss. Leave alone somebody who has passed away because of COVID. Even if it was just about any other reason, or even if someone died a natural death, you can imagine that now you can't even have the same funeral. And I think last time we talked about the question of at what point do we allow our culture to come into play at the same time when we are enhancing the protocols to actually prevent the spread of COVID-19. There was the story of the man, I think he was from Meru, the one who had many wives, and he died, and the man was really old when he passed away. And he had, I think, over I think, was it 200 children or something like that? And you can imagine, who do you tell out of the 200 children, who do you tell to come and who not to come? That becomes a big question, and that's why we are having the discussion we're going to have today. We're already having today. So let's move on. And for us, it's about, let's look at what culture as well as spirituality are. And an author by the name of Hofstede in 2011 said that culture is a collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from others. If you just hear that sentence alone, the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes members of one group or category of people from others. It did not say culture is your last name. It did also not say that culture is the blood that you have inside your veins. It said about programming of the mind. Culture consists a patterned way of thinking, feeling, reacting, acquired and transmitted mainly by symbols constituting the distinctive achievements of human groups, including their embodiment in artifacts. So basically, people who you feel a kinship or a closeness to because of a history of things that you share that are common, that have been passed on from generation to generation, then you can feel like you're one culture. You can actually claim to be of the same culture. So what I want to submit today is that if a young person grew up in Buruburu, in here in Nairobi, and they grew up with a friend of theirs whose last name does not sound like theirs, but they've grown up there and they've lived together for 35 years, and maybe they got houses, they rented houses just near each other, and they have families, and now their families have been friends. I want to submit that even regardless of their last names, that they actually do share a culture together. They've grown up together, they've seen things that are similar, and maybe they even think, feel, and react the same way to certain situations. So that, to me, begins to say why culture is a complex thing, and it's not just about what we in Africa like to call tribes or tribal groupings, okay? Or even our clans, for instance. How about spirituality? According to Puchalski, spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or the sacred. In this case, the concept of who we call God. And so spirituality is not a religion. And as a matter of fact, I think when people say this person is very spiritual, yes, maybe they mean that the person is spiritual, but many times they're referring to the fact that somebody might actually be very religious. And those are two very different things. So you have people who take walks, and that's how they connect to themselves and to the moment and to nature. And you have people who don't even go to any religious service. They don't subscribe to any religion, but they are spiritual. And in fact, you'll ask them, are you spiritual? They'll say, yes, I'm spiritual. It is not a foreign concept. It is actually a true concept, because even if you look at traditional African society, what used to happen was that the expression of connectedness was mostly through people connecting with nature and with each other, and with acts of service that they were performing. So if we can agree that yes, religion is part of spirituality, but spirituality is not necessarily religion, then we can agree that an African person is complex, a Kenyan is complex, and that is why we are interested to see the role of our culture and spirituality throughout this next phase of the pandemic. We know now that we're going to be living with this pandemic for a very long time. And I think if we do not look at our spirituality or our culture, we might not be able to intervene the way we are supposed to intervene, because these might be the key. This might be the key to how we actually are successful or not be successful. How does culture play out during a pandemic? So there are three basic things, three general things that we've seen that are really affected, and there's an interplay with each other during a pandemic. And we found that one of them is the question of perceived causation of disease and death. Basically, in better language, where does this come from? We are asking ourselves, what is the idea of causation according to our culture? What is the causation of disease and death as well? So you find that in some parts of the country, and I think, I'm excited because you're healthcare workers, and I'm sure you see this every day. Someone might just bring a child to hospital and say somebody looked at them badly, the evil eye. They might even say it's witchcraft or it's a curse, or that there's a taboo that somebody's parent did, and now it's actually coming to haunt them, generations later. So you find that as Africans, there's that complex interplay between where we think the causation of our illnesses and disease are from, and how we actually end up receiving our help. So, of course, if I think that it was witchcraft that caused COVID-19, what do I think I'm going to do? I'm not going to go to hospital. I won't come to KNH to any of the departments there. Or to the infectious diseases unit. I'm going to go to a friend inside in a hut somewhere in a dark corner which is smoky, and I'm going to consult them, and I'm going to actually ask them. The other time when we were speaking and I was out of town, I was in one of the northern frontier towns. It was interesting that I saw on many posts, electrical posts, that doctor, the doctor who treats everything, the one who treats bad luck, kushinda bet, kupata simu, those ones. I found them everywhere, and I said to myself, surely, as in, how is it that this person is this popular? And then I realized that inside us, in our makeup as Africans, people have this very deep cultural identification with supernatural causes and causation of diseases and death. And normally that there is no one person you can actually convince that it is just an organic microbe that has come, and that it's actually what you need to do. So even as you're sanitizing, many people, if you can remember when we were talking about the non-pharmaceutical interventions, people are sanitizing their hands, yes, but they're sanitizing on one hand because they are being told to do it, but not because they deeply believe that sanitization is going to be the one that ends that curse. For them, it's a curse, so they're sanitizing so they're not arrested, but then in the evening, they'll go and consult someone else who will help them to overcome the curse. The second thing we've seen about culture is about traditional and spiritual healing. I've alluded to it a bit. But then what is sad about it is that during the Ebola outbreak, for instance, in West Africa, there were a number of traditional healers who contracted the disease and died while attempting to heal local people who had actually been infected with Ebola, or family members who had come into contact with people. So instead of them going to health facilities to get help, they went to seek help from traditional healers who told them and claimed they could heal them. Of course, after parting with a lot of money. It's never a consultation fee like for doctors. In fact, healthcare workers, let me tell you right now, if you think you have a good consultation fee, yours is nowhere near the traditional people, because it's ridiculous. So there's one time I remember that we had there was a case of someone who was arrested with 4 million shillings cash. I don't know if you remember that story, but there was one, a traditional healer. And when they were followed, it was just about success and relationship things, very very ambiguous, very 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 ambiguous things. But they actually get a lot of money because they tell you go bring this 10 million and go bring the other, and people do that. When human beings and when Africans are desperate, we go that route and we find ourselves spending a lot of money to actually get that kind of help. Okay, we've seen that in the same case about traditional and spiritual healing, that we've gotten similar reports in Kenya, where there was an imam in Nairobi and also a traditional healer in the coast who contracted COVID-19 and died. We've also found cases of preachers who've been praying with people and believing in faith healing, and they're finding that they're actually contracting the disease, and sadly for some of them, they end up passing away. That is really sad for us. The third one that I think has been the hot button issue, especially here in Kenya, has been the question of funeral and burial practices. The protocols are telling us within 48 hours, the body of a person who passes away from COVID-19 needs to be in the ground. Then you ask yourself, what of in the cultures where the washing of the body is done by the spouse, or the washing of the dead body is done by a family member to show the connection or the respect or the final rights, and within the same African context, you have to think that if this washing is not done, if this cleaning is not done, then there'll be a curse on the family. Again, remember the curses we talked about? So people are now wondering, do I do this and risk my family getting, this curse? But then, of course, they're not being allowed to, because, if you find what's happening with health officials, they're coming when they're already inside body bags, inside the casket, and also when the health officials themselves are in PPEs. And so therefore, there's nobody who has that opportunity. So there's a gap here. And I think what we need to do is not to tell people whether it's right or wrong, but to figure out, can we at least tackle that question and see what is the infectious nature of a body that has been infected by of someone who has died with COVID-19. And I think it's very important for us to do that, because we will, unlike in other places where there is no such intimate connection between the dead and the living, maybe it might not mean much there. And I hope we're not copying and and pasting protocols just for the sake of doing it. Maybe to see, is there any scientific backing that there's transmission? If there is, then therefore we can continue and find a way to negotiate with people, to tell them, look, it will actually harm you more than help you. But if it doesn't, then maybe say, okay, since we're going to be with this for a long time, for how long are we going to bury our dead after 48 hours without any contact? And will that time affect how we then express our cultures moving forward? Because that's also the other thing. Maybe the people who are born during this COVID-19 time, or the people who actually grew up during this time, might not know any other expression or any other way of conducting these final rites, and therefore creating a significant point in African history where some of these practices were also interfered with, and changed. So let's also think about that a bit. And how about during a pandemic, the question of spirituality? We know that during a lot of pandemics, Spanish flu and all the others up the line until now, the role of spirituality has been really, really strong. And there's something interesting because it has mixed results. Spirituality has both positive as well as negative outcomes to do with how treatment outcomes play out. So you find that for spirituality, the idea of having hope, instilling hope in people, in the terms of supporting each other, and prayer, knowing that that you're supported by a higher being, or by a community of people, can actually be helpful. But on many times also spirituality tends to interfere with people, because there are spiritual directives from maybe some denominations and religions which require people not to seek medical intervention. So for instance, if you belong to a sect or a religion that says you cannot get blood transfusion, like I was talking about earlier, then you find that you are at a disadvantage if that is a life-saving intervention. The same thing, if you're told that you cannot be able to, you can't be admitted in a hospital, for instance, or you cannot go to hospital, then you'll find that there'll be cases increasingly of people who succumb to this disease, or who go through complications of this disease at home while waiting for divine intervention, which many times, of course, while we might all want for it to work and to be there for everyone, maybe it won't happen for everybody, and that might actually be a negative more than a positive. Also, there's the second point there is about conflicts between faith and medical practice. It's widely known and widely seen that there are times when faith does conflict with medical practice, because how do you marry, without being an intellectual, the concept of miracles and the concept of medicine? Sometimes it takes a lot more than just being simple and saying, oh, God has enabled doctors to study, and healthcare workers, so that's how he's helping you. But for somebody who might believe the faith and the question of miracles in a very, very basic manner, they'll tell you, but if you read any of the holy books, there was no admission. There's nobody who went to be prayed for a miracle, and then they were admitted to hospital for 2 weeks. All of them, it was instant. It happened there, and we believe that it can happen again. Now, that can create a conflict, because as a healthcare worker, and even as a psychologist for us, you cannot challenge somebody directly, and even if you do it, it's not going to add any value to your intervention. So it calls for us to be a bit more sensitive to people's spiritual expression, and then finding where is the happy medium of seeing, okay, fine, yes, we understand this is what you believe, but as at now, even as you're waiting for the miracle to happen, can we adopt something to be saving? I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of the pandemic here in Kenya, there was that question of the chai. It was chai tungu, right? And I remember it was turungi, and I remember listening to it, and I said to myself, if anybody just listened to the story without the mystique and the mystery that was put around it, you'd never have believed it. That somebody woke up in the middle of the night, a child was born at about 3 a.m., and then the child disappeared. But before the child disappeared, they said, for this COVID to disappear from the world and to heal you, you have to take this majani achai kali with water. It has to be warm. It has to be made in such and such a way, and that's going to help you. Then the child disappeared, and it actually became a huge thing. And you see, for people who might want to laugh at that and say, oh my goodness, how can somebody believe in something ridiculous like that? I think this is why this topic is very important, because it is not about what we know logically or what we know rationally. It's more about what people believe deep in themselves and what they ascribe to. And if somebody believes that that child was actually sent on earth to come and save us from COVID, believe me, there is no amount of scientific evidence and papers done by the National Institute of Health and by Dr. Anthony Fauci or anybody else will convince that person. So I think when we talk about culture and spirituality, what is fascinating for me, and even for those of us who practice in the area of mental health, is the idea that belief is a very strong and powerful tool. And that's why you find that a lot of the decisions that people make under the influence of their culture or the influence of spirituality sometimes might not look rational or logical, but they actually do make them, and they make them every day. And so we have to know, we have to coexist with that. So the way medicine has been taught traditionally has been hard science of pathogens and management, disease management. The component of culture and spirituality now must become one that people heed to, pay attention to when we are intervening with our patients. Also, as a country, we demonstrated that we actually are a spiritual country, or we believe in religious expression, because on the 21st of March, it was declared, the 21st of March was declared a national day of prayer by the president himself. And so there was a measure of comfort that Kenyans got by knowing that the head of state is saying, yes, we have the scientists, yes, we have the epidemiologists, yes, we have all the scientists working on this, but also we need help from above. So that was an amazingly thought out idea, because there was actually sensitivity on the part of the presidency to know that Kenyans are ascribed to this. And in times of anxiety and in times of fear and loss, the one place they can run for refuge that they know that they can actually listen to is within the idea of prayer. Now, it's an expression, it's a very powerful one for many people, but then it then becomes difficult when somebody gets infected, because the same prayer will be the one that actually comes and trips people if they do not have that idea of belief. Now, am I saying that miracles don't happen? No, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that yes, miracles happen, but if you have never experienced a miracle, sometimes also it becomes harder to see that miracle. And it's better for us to see, can we encourage health-seeking behavior for our people so that at least they can get help even as we're waiting for those miracles to happen. If they happen, we celebrate. If they don't, that's when now we really must intervene, or we need to find a way to intervene. So as we wind down, um, of course, there's no way I would have given this topic justice with everything. Culture is too loaded, and I wanted us to have more time for people to really discuss and share their experiences. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people on the panel as well who have a lot to share. But the question becomes, cultural competence. Do we have enough cultural competence, even as we practice, or even as we come up with all of these recommendations, even as our minister, our CS health stands in front of the country and gives us daily briefings, and the CSs, do we have, as a country, as healthcare workers, do we have that cultural competence which will actually help us to control this pandemic better in a way that we can actually use what we talked about during the non-pharmaceutical intervention presentation, using persuasion rather than coercion. Remember, we said we can't force people into submitting, and for me that's really key, because I think we need to remember that we cannot force people to do something, and it would not really be helpful for us to do that. But if we persuade them using their cultural expressions and spirituality, then maybe we can be able to be successful. Also, the idea of using community gatekeepers. I've seen all these council of elders everywhere. Apart from appointing politicians, I don't know if they're actually involved in pandemic response. So the idea might be, is there anything that these cultural gatekeepers can actually add value to this pandemic response? I think there is, and there's a lot. And if you really ask me, for me, they are the key that will actually unlock that safety even moving forward. Sometimes you might even find that they are more powerful than any government directive given, because the government directive is given on one hand, and on the other hand, as we saw, there'll be security enforcement to make sure that those directives are followed. But a cultural enforcement normally has a lot of what we call a social contract, and people don't feel safe breaking that kind of a contract. Also, we are suggesting that pandemic response teams must include behavioral scientists, including psychologists and anthropologists and sociologists from the onset, so that at least we start seeing, are these measures we're putting in place, are they flouting anything? Do we are we is there something we're missing? Is there something we can actually be able to you know to borrow from them? Are we learning things? How people are feeling, how people are thinking, how people are behaving? Is there something that we can actually intervene as experts to help out with this? Also, let's also remember that spirituality gives hope, and it also gives a sense of meaning in life. So we cannot say that we'll go through this pandemic only using the scientific route, which does not involve any of the spirituality or cultural expressions, but that let us give room for that expression. And that is why, even after the houses of worship were opened, and they were opened with the limitations they were opened with, people, at least they said, okay, at least we've been given this. And even if they complained about what how it looked like, they said, okay, fine, let's try. We'll try our best, and hopefully we can be able to be able to pray and get hope in the middle of this very dark situation. And finally, of course, we always say that we learn as we go. There's nobody who's an expert in the whole world right now. There's nobody who's an expert on COVID-19. I can promise you, there's people who are publishing papers left, right, and center. But if you really look keenly at those papers, many of them are very small studies with sample sizes that don't really make so much sense. And maybe the research is concentrating so much about getting a cure and seeing how the reaction and protocols of treatment, how they work, which is great. I think it's time for us to start saying, what role does spirituality and culture from around the world, what cultures seem to be more resilient, what spiritual expressions seem to be more resilient, what are we seeing, what kind of patients who have either spirituality or cultural expressions that are deep versus the ones who don't, what is the outcome for this kind of. So these are kind of studies, I think at this point we can begin to do that, because we have so many people who are affected. And I think it will help us to know the direction to moving forward. And finally, of course, I keep telling you, and I told you I'll never stop telling you, that your work is priceless and you're immensely appreciated. And we have a team ready to work with you, that have already been working with you, of course. And you know that we have these other, we have the teams that work on Tuesdays and Thursdays as well with PFA. We also have other teams that we're now trying to set up, because we've decided, look, we're in this together. And now that we got married, in quotes, we're not going to divorce anytime soon. So let's get used to each other, and let's get used to the idea that we have help, and it is great. For us, it's an opportunity, it's a privilege to serve with you and to actually work with you, and also to support you as you do this very difficult work that you're doing. And as I always sign off saying is that after all this is said and done, you will be and you are the heroes of this pandemic. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your attention and your time.
Thank you, Dr. Gidua, for that wonderful presentation. We truly appreciate. Sorry, I've seen so many comments about CPD. I will address it at the end of the session. But thank you so much for the presentation. Now, we've talked about culture and spirituality. And
yes,
as we're having this discussion, let's remember we've just seen a significant change in the way Muslim brothers and sisters do their things, from 2 million attendees, approximately 2 million to 1,000 people at the Hajj, because of social distance and the new culture. So this has really transformed how we do things, not just our cultural practices, but also the way we attend church. Recently, we saw people have to book online to go to church, and it's only a limited number. There's no more Jumuiya, there's no more the women congregations that usually happen in church, or the men congregation. This has really changed us. So Dr. Gidua, my question to you is, how do we adapt to this change? We've not even started addressing the culture and the burial practices. So let's start with the spirituality, because I think it might be a bit easier. So how do we adapt to this change? Yes.
Oh my God, that is such a profound question, because, like when you're talking about the Hajj, I remember a lot of people, because as I'm meant to believe, and I know from friends who've attended, that those tickets sell out immediately, isn't it? To even go there. So you can imagine that for the first time, there's actually limitations and the number of people who have to go. And it's such, and it's a duty. For example, for Muslim brothers and sisters, it is a duty. It is one of those things that you must do, or you aspire to do when your time on earth is here. So imagining that it's taken away from you as an option, then can introduce a lot of anxiety and also can introduce a lot of uncertainty about the future. And even as a whole religion, what then do you tell your faithful about, how to conduct themselves, in terms of, is it a requirement anymore? What should happen? So it's not an easy one. I think we will have to find a way to I don't know, I saw somewhere where they're saying that they're taking congregations online. It's not the same experience, but we have to start learning how to adapt and adopt to this. And I think, maybe, I don't know if it's going to be about increasing the number of services, or it will just be about, because if you imagine, like, many religions normally have maybe one service a week, but then there's some, like in the Christian faith, depending on the denomination, they have maybe a Wednesday meeting or a Saturday meeting. They might actually have to increase the number of services they have. I know there's a protocol about having only two per Sunday. And for Friday, I don't even know, like, even with Eid approaching on Friday, I don't know how people will cope with it. So Doc, I think, without having the answer, or pretending to have the answer, the one thing I can say is that it's an unprecedented time for all of us. And for the very first time, even the religions will be tested so much about what do you tell your faithful about congregating. So, and it's tough. You can't just come up, and because I remember, even when the committee that was formed, the interfaith committee that was formed, I can't even imagine any of those, religious leaders standing there while those protocols are being read, and imagining they won't be stoned by their congregations. I remember people were angry. How can you say people who are over 58, and yet they're the ones who are the leaders in these congregations, can't attend church, or even can't attend services? How are you saying that people under 13 and the people with young families, that's the reason why they go for these religious services? So it's a tough place for us, for the country. I think the one thing I can say is that we should count ourselves lucky that we even have that option. There are countries right now that do not even have the option in the first place to even go and meet physically like that. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but I think we can begin there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that attempt to answer. And I'm seeing from
Yes.
Francis. Francis is saying, thank you, Dr. Oscar. On that awesome presentation. COVID-19 has really changed us, whether culture or spiritual.
Yes.
Judy Mashuka is saying, thank you, Dr. Gidua, for that timely and relevant presentation. It looks pragmatic to integrate the diversity of culture and spiritual expression by involving community representatives in research and response teams in search for sustainable solutions to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Judy, for that suggestion and input. I agree with you. It's time we involve the community, maybe the elders, even in our burial practices, our cultural burial practices. And you gave a good example of whereby some cultures and African cultures, there's the way we treat the body.
Yes.
Sometimes we keep it for long due to culture. People have to come back home. Everybody has to pay respect and view the body. The cultures are very different. So now we are having to face a new way of doing things where if you're used to the body sleeping in the homestead, now it's not sleeping.
Yes.
If you're used to having disco matanga, now there's no more disco matanga happening in the villages. And to some extent, I think it's affecting the people who've been directly affected by the loss of their loved one. And also the fact that once the burial is over, people can't stay around for longer. The nest becomes empty very fast compared to before. Before, you'd find your relatives have come for a full week. They're sleeping there. They're keeping you company. They're comforting you, consoling you. They even extend their stay by another 2 weeks after the funeral. But now, that has really changed. Yes.
Doc, it's interesting because you say that because you remember I also talked about that maybe COVID-19 will change our culture or influence our culture to change at a time like this. Let me give an example from the days of Mau Mau. So if you look, if you indulge me for a minute, because we're just talking freely and we're just trying to think this out.
Yes.
if you look at cultures mostly from Western Kenya and Nyanza, where I suspect you're talking about, like, people sleeping overnight and all of that,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
There's that culture that you're talking about where people stay and they stay for a week, and they're mourning with the family, they stay with them, and in some instances some people even stay for a whole month, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But the closer you come to Nairobi and the closer you go to like central Kenya, you find a different concept
Mm.
where where this gentleman by the name of Jackson Biko, one time he wrote an article about how his wife, who happens to be from central Kenya and he's from Nyanza, when her father died, he went for the funeral and he was shocked. So he wrote that experience and he said the way he didn't believe that people disappeared right after that.
Mm.
And so people keep asking, how comes people in like central Kenya, how comes they don't cry during funerals, how comes they disappear, they tell each other to be strong and all of that. And then I was given a story. I've been writing there's something I'm working on about the trauma in Kenya, and where some of these things have come from. And I was told something interesting, Doc, that do you know that during the time for the emergency, that people used to be killed and paraded to villages, and they used to be buried en mass and in mass graves. And it used to be done by the colonialists, and they used to make the villagers come and watch that. So what used to happen, as a sign of defiance,
Mm.
people refused to cry, not because they didn't care or they do not want to cry or they do not love their loved ones, but
Mm.
because if they cried, they were going to show they're going to show the colonialists that they were winning and they were breaking them psychologically and emotionally. So
Mm.
they took this kind of pact to be quiet. But now, since the current generation does not know that background, people still don't cry.
Yeah.
And so it might look like people are so cold. Oh my goodness, why are they so cold? Why do they do that? It's actually very interesting to me, because when I talked about that even with my own dad and with other older people, they seem to remember a time before that time when they could actually freely cry and all of that, but then they couldn't explain why nowadays it doesn't happen. So I'm suspecting that this COVID-19 situation will
Mm.
come with its own consequences like those ones. There'll be a generation that finds and thinks it's a norm, because it will be the first time they've lost a relative, it will be the
Yeah.
first time they've lost someone significant in their life, and they won't be allowed to stay for that month. They won't be allowed to do the disco matanga. They won't be allowed to be the body to sleep overnight. And so some of these cultures might start changing. And so you'll be hearing them from the distant past. Oh, tulikuwa tunazika watu after wamekaa kwa nyumba for a long time, but nobody will actually have experienced it. So I don't know. It's interesting to me that when something like this happens, it has the potential of influencing the culture as well. So that as a way of adaptation, people just imagine, okay, we don't have it anymore.
Mm.
I don't know.
Wow. Okay, I'm seeing a comment from George, and he's saying it's unfortunate we cannot teroburu in this COVID era. How do we go about business? We cannot cry. We're saying community elders and leaders are more respected or listened to compared to administrative leaders. For instance, Morans listen to elders more compared to administrative leaders. Let the elders be engaged more. And I agree with him. I agree with Ombiro. If we
Absolutely.
engage the elders at the village elders, I think it will be a bit easier
Mm.
for for us to accept that
Yes.
times are changing and this is a new era and things have to be done in a particular manner. I still remember the first burial we had in Siaya and the emotions it evoked.
Yes.
A lot of people were stung by the Ministry of Health and the way we conducted ourselves,
I
the public
remember.
health, exactly. And
Mm.
up to now, we still do get a few complaints when somebody buries their loved one who's died of COVID. People
Yes.
say they're not allowed to view the body. The body comes when it's already wrapped. We can't view our person.
Are we
The
even sure
mother,
it's a person?
exactly. So those are some of the sentiments that people still have, but we have a lot to do in terms of sensitizing people. And I agree with you, probably this is going to change us. Has actually changed us.
Yes.
And I agree with you. Very soon, these will be stories that we're telling our great grandchildren that this used to
Mm.
happen, and they won't
The-
be able to relate.
yeah, they'll think you're joking, and you see, it's just that as Africans we are very quick to judge other people, and we think they don't have cultures also. The other example I can give to us and to the healthcare workers listening, and we're taking part in this discussion today,
Mm.
is the world wars. It's the same thing that happened in Europe. sometimes we look at Wazungus and we say, Wazungus don't have emotions. As Africans, we express ourselves. It's true. They also used to do it until they lost so many people themselves, they couldn't keep up with the number of funerals. If they could keep up with the number of funerals using the traditional way of doing it, they'd never have buried all their dead. So they had to limit the amount of time they were doing it. They would only have probably a blessing at the graveside, quick blessing, few people, on to the next one, on to the next one. And the people who are the clergy were so burnt out and had so much severe effect after that, that they conducted all these things, but they were the ones who ended up becoming traumatized more than anybody else. As they were helping people go through it. So when you find a culture that does it that way now, we shouldn't be quick to judge and say, look at these people, they're senseless, or they don't do this, or they don't do the other. Many times there's something that has actually happened to them in their history that has made them to be where they are.
That's true. That's true. I usually find the people to be a bit cold. They don't greet each other. They mind their business. They keep to
Yes.
themselves.
Yes.
So we are going to that generation or that era.
Yes.
Yes. And I'm seeing a comment from Rose Njoroge. She's saying, in what ways would you say this pandemic has impacted culture and spirituality positively? And she's given an example of the people now have had to reconcile that God is not in the place of worship where we go, but where we are, since He's a spirit. And that, I'm sure it will take some time before we change. There's a
Yes.
population that
Yes.
a percent that we still have to transform, or they still have to change the way they think.
Absolutely.
Because they have to accept that God is everywhere. I don't have to be physically under gospel ministries or tabernacle of glory or
No,
in
no.
the
Yes.
temple for Him to be there. So
To be there. Yes.
how do we manage this as a society? How do we encourage people to continue worshiping God wherever they are, and they don't have to look at one preacher to feel that is the go-between between God?
And of course, spirituality and even religion is a very personal thing, and it's a very touchy subject for many people. But I like what you've said. The question was about what are the positives that have come out of it. Number one is that what you've just said, that maybe worshiping God and being a member of a congregation does not mean that you have to be somewhere physically, and that God can listen to you no matter where you are. Number two, the other thing that I think has come out culturally, it affects mostly men. In fact, I'll tell you, as a man myself, that being home with your family longer hours, okay, being there to support your family. I think the pandemic has forced people to really look at their families and to look at themselves and say, what is my role here, and how am I adding value to these people that I have brought into this world, or the people that look up to me for guidance and support. So I think there are many things also that have come out culturally. There's also a culture of washing hands and becoming just generally cleaner. We are getting reports from other places that other communicable diseases are actually, and I don't know, you guys are the experts, you're the ones who can tell me. I don't know what the rates of cholera are right now, or even what the rates of other communicable diseases are, but I suspect if all of us are washing hands, if all of us are sanitizing, that those things are going down. So if you look at our own behaviors, our cultural our cultural expressions, which have been about attitudes and feelings and situations, we're finding that we actually have some that are very positive. Of course, the ones that I'm mentioning are the hot button ones, because I also realize in the time that we have for the presentation, it's not adequate to address everything. But there are many things also that I think if we pay closer attention, we can see that we're actually growing in. I think also the idea, for me, the fact that people can be able to be deliberate in reaching out to people. We have a Kenyan culture. Let me not say Kenyan. Remember, I said culture is complex, isn't it?
Yes.
Let me call it Nairobi urban culture. Okay. So I say, Dr. Kalondu, we meet, we get to know each other, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have each other's numbers and we're supposed to talk to each other. Then I tell you, nitakutafuta. And that nitakutafuta ends up becoming 5 years later,
True.
And then when I meet you, unajua maisha ilikuwa ngumu, hata tulifanya sijui nini, then I don't know what happened. Then you find that people don't normally seek out social support deliberately. But this pandemic, for me, is starting a culture of social support that is deliberate. Every time when I'm speaking with us, or when I'm on this call, I feel like there are people who are here, I might not see people physically, but I feel like we're in a group of some kind, and that's why I think some people have said, oh, it feels like therapy sometimes when we talk on some topics, and especially the ones which have to do with how do you take care of yourself and all of that. And so I can see how that is a positive thing. It's actually creating a culture of reducing stigma around mental health, reducing the idea that seeking out help is a problem. It's not. So I think it's a positive thing, which I'm excited about.
Mm.
Mm.
Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I think there was a burial somewhere in Rift Valley. I can't remember exactly where.
Uh-huh.
And people had gone against the government requirements. And I remember
Yes.
the administrative leader telling them, nitawafukuza hapa. And he will not let the burial go ahead. And people did not move. They
Of
actually
course.
continued sitting down.
Yes.
So this is very key, that the sentiment that Biro has brought up about involving the community elders and leaders
Yes.
is very key. And
And
I
you
also
know,
agree because, yes, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
So no, sorry, Doc. Yeah, sure.
And it's part of the recommendations that you gave, that community entry is key. Involving
Mm,
them is key.
mm.
Yeah, so
And
it's
even
good.
and even the tone, you can imagine the tone that the person was adopting also. How can you go to a funeral and tell people, I'll chase you out of here?
Mm.
That also shows that either the person was also stressed themselves and they didn't know what they were saying,
Mm-hmm.
and they were blinded by their orders so much so. And I try to educate people also about security officers and the way security officers conduct themselves and they do their work. Many times an order comes in a specific manner, and they imagine and they feel they have to do it the same way it has been talked about. But many times it also calls for someone to really think and apply some measure of balance and wisdom to say, okay, if I tell these people I'm going to chase them, am I adding their comfort during this time of grief? Am I agitating them? Could I also be at risk? Because you can imagine, if someone who is mourning, I can promise you, if they pick up a panga and cut you down after you've told them you'll chase them, really, I'm not saying that you deserve it, but at the same time, it's just lack of weighing the situation of where somebody is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not the same as a bar. If you found people in a bar and they're all drinking and they're being unruly, you can go and tell them, I'll chase you out of here. That's appropriate. But a funeral is a very different and a somber situation.
that's true. So
Mm.
my question is to the task force now.
Yes.
Is there any particular measures you put in place to alert our administrative officers about how to approach some of these things? Because as you've said, people are at that time are going through a tough time. They're grieving their loved one who might not have died of COVID. They've just they died, and now all burials have to maintain the same protocol. So
Yes.
a way? Is there a way, or is there any educational sessions you're having with the chief, the sub chiefs?
Okay, and
Yes,
no, that's a
okay.
very, I like that's a really really powerful point, Doc, because to me, I think that without partnering with the administrative authorities, also any of the interventions will not work. And
Hmm.
especially because for them, how they interpret it, the way it might be imagined in Afia House and at Nyayo House, and with people sitting down at very high level at State House, it will look really nice on paper. But then when you tell that administrative officer on the ground, the chief in a place, and you didn't really tell him what your thought behind it was, then what will happen is that he'll enforce it the way he knows how to enforce other orders,
Hmm.
without the same measure of sensitivity, probably. And of course, there are some who are gifted with that, and that's why they're liked by people, but there are some who are not, because that's not their training. Also, if you look at police officers, we've worked with them a lot, especially about how to, how to interact with members of the public, and because that's their primary job anyway. So you're finding that they're improving over time. Now they're actually being able to talk with people differently. They're now being able to, and also because for all of these people, there are sons and daughters, there are brothers and sisters as well, and parents. So it's not like they're removed from the culture. It's just that they wear a different authority when they are doing their work. But what I've found is that the police are very receptive, even the administration are receptive. And I like that suggestion because I think for me, that's an overlooked group of people who, without enlisting them, really, it won't really help. And the task force actually, incidentally, we used them as the gateway to see Kenyans, by the way. in every region we went, we used the regional commissioners, the county commissioners, and also in conjunction with the officers of governors, but then realizing the governors' offices are devolved units, but the national government goes through the county commissioners and the regional commissioners. So we had to contact both of them. We found that many of them are very receptive to learning about mental health. They actually were very keen on how it affected their people. And I think it is time for us to actually partner with them to really be the advocates for that, especially from national level. Because the task force was national, I think they will be the natural people to help us.
That's true. That's true. We really need to involve them and think about, as much as we, as you said, we make our directions, our instructions,
Yes.
where we can do Zoom meetings and we can maintain social distance. On ground, things are a bit different.
Hey, very different, very different.
Yes, and the community might not be receptive or understand the logic behind. So we have to be
Yeah.
very, we have to
No,
be
in fact,
careful.
sorry, Doc. In fact, just to back you up before the thought disappears,
Yes.
is when we went to the town that I was saying, Northern Frontier, I remember the team I was with, we were the only ones in masks. I remember we entered the town and we looked like aliens. Because everyone's looking at us like, what are these guys what are these guys doing? So the first thing was, these ones must be from Nairobi.
And that was 2 weeks ago.
And that was just 2 weeks ago. So even as we're talking about cessation of movement, as we're talking about all of these good measures that we read about and we hear about, there are parts of this country that still do not connect with the message. And I think it is time to see what will make them connect with the message. Is it that cultural and community system we're talking about, the elders and the people who are valued there? So to me, I really think that's where we have to go, because just expecting that someone listen to the address on radio or they sent it on WhatsApp, the way all of us have the speech, as the moment the president finishes talking, boom, next minute everybody has a speech.
Yes.
So you wonder, was he texting guys after he's ready? What happened? And so you find that a lot of people, because of having that, we assume that everybody is connecting with the message, and it's not the case on the ground, really.
That's true. Jeffrey is saying that it's clear COVID-19 pandemic is here with us and will cause great evolution in our cultural practices and spirituality practices as well.
Yes.
We collectively have to accept this new era and adjust accordingly, but take it one day at a time. That's true, Geoffrey.
Perfect, yeah.
We have to take it one day at a time. Joshua Tanu is saying, the first time I greeted my granny with gota, I saw hell.
Oh my goodness, Tanu, this is I'm imagining. You see, this is what we're talking about. Even requiring people to put on face masks is a life-saving suggestion, which is true. But imagine how it looks like. You're going to see your grandparent and you're in a mask, first of all, then you're not greeting them. You're actually, or if you're from the Ma culture, you're not allowing them to touch your head. You're telling them to sanitize before they touch. I mean, what is that? and that actually, for me, is where we are saying, like, okay, can we, and I remember talking to someone who's senior in government, and there's something he said that I really hold on to. We're telling people sanitize, we're telling people social distance. Can we explain it like we're explaining to a 2-year-old? Can we do it per culture? Can we do it per grouping of people to understand? Because it might look like it's obvious to everybody, but it's not.
That's true.
It's not. And you're finding that for you and I, we probably have been putting on the masks, we have been social distance, we've been doing all that. But the moment we enter the car and go to Ushago, we forget all those things and throw them out of the window. Because again, when you go there, you have a different. You're not doc when you're in the Ushago.
No.
You're the daughter of the place, and they expect you to be the way they raised you, or the way they expect you to be. So that's the challenge we have.
Okay. And Alan says, sorry for the background noise.
It's okay.
Alan is saying the problem with involving elders that are not accommodative to change. Problem with involving elders, they are not accommodative to change. Sometimes we need directives and they should apply across the board. When we apply it selectively based on status in society, people will resist.
Okay. Well, I mean, you might have a point, but I also think it's for Alan, I think that also as a generalization, I don't
Mm.
think that we can say fairly that elders are not accommodative
Yeah,
to
that's
change.
true. Mm.
I think we can say that maybe there are some who are resistant to change, but the
Mm.
one thing I've seen about elders is that you cannot go as a 25-year-old person to tell an elder to change and they listen to you seriously many times.
That's true.
So it's also about the strategy you adopt. Can you take somebody of authority, somebody who they can listen to? Because even for elders, they have learned through their experience in life that maybe taking direction from someone younger is not always the best all the time. So maybe we need to look for who are the credible voices that elders can listen to. That is the key. To me, who is credible, whether they're elder or they're youth or whoever it might be, that's who we need to help us, because we cannot say that it's going to be the president. We can't say it's going to be the regional commissioners. Neither can we say it's going to be anyone, even in the health ministry, who's going to do that. But if we find credible voices that are respected by those communities, okay, including
Mm.
politicians. Sometimes I even wish that politicians, instead of talking about one man, one shilling,
Mm.
or whatever it is they're talking about, that they could actually really be helping the government to fight the coronavirus pandemic by actually involving the communities that elected them, because they were actually elected by people on the ground. They might have some traction that they can actually bring to the table to help.
That's true. That's true. And I agree with you. I think the political leaders have a big role to play in this, in
Mm,
persuading the communities, because we talked about persuasion rather than coercion.
yes.
So we really need to find a way of engaging or involving the MCAs instead of having impeachment in all the counties. They could be
Yes,
busy helping us in this fight as healthcare
I
workers.
know. It's so interesting, Doc, because and I know that we can say, we will say that life cannot stop. Life
Mm,
has to continue because coronavirus is here with us to stay. But that doesn't mean that we also turn our back against vulnerable members of the society.
that's true.
And we have to protect every vulnerable member of society by being responsible, first of all, but also by making sure we are still drumming in that message. And
Mm,
because, like I've said, these are elected leaders with the mandate from people, the way they can use their power in a positive way is by helping to stop the spread of this virus. Okay. And I know that
yeah.
there was someone who had said that, was asking me, and they were doubting my numbers about the 53 million. I'll
Yes.
give you the yes, which is fair. I like it when people do that.
Mm,
I want you to refer to what is called the CIA fact book.
mm,
CIA fact book is a publication by the US government that actually tracks every country's population real time. They have
mm,
many ways of doing it, and so they normally give you a more accurate tally than yours, because yours will always be political. Like right now, we're talking about revenue allocation. I can
yes.
promise you, your population will be massaged a bit,
Mm,
so that you don't look like you're too many or you're too few. But
yes.
then again, yeah, don't quote me. That's not what I think. But I think that sometimes we look at independent providers of data
Mm,
because because they have nothing to lose by saying how many you are, or to
mm,
gain for that matter. They have
yes.
nothing to gain. So that's what I normally do. And also, you're welcome to look at any other place. So I'm not saying that that's the correct one. I'm not the one who counted, but it's just that's just one reference that gives a general outlay of the numbers of who we are.
Good. I'll check it out. I didn't know about it. I was also doubting your figures like Kiende about the 40% being
I
under
like that.
18 and
Yeah.
61% under 25. So thank you. Thank you for
In
alerting
fact,
us
what
to
I'll
that
do,
real-time
let me
source.
do the. You know what I'll do? I'll
Yes.
actually, in the comment section, is there a place
Yes.
for the chat? I'll actually post the link, so that
Okay.
anybody can actually feel free to actually access it. Is that fair?
That's fair.
I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's a comment from Zachary Kimani, and he's saying this is informative. A behavioral cultural paradigm shift needs to be encouraged in curbing the spread of COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you, Zachary, for that. Elizabeth
Thank you.
is saying the session is very informative and touching on our day-to-day issues, especially during this time of COVID-19. Most of the
Oh, thank
challenges
you.
discussed is what we go through every day. So thank you, Dr. Gidua, for this
Thank
insightful,
you.
thought-out topic.
Thank you.
Lilian is saying, I think that elders are accommodative to change. It matters how you approach them. That's true.
Mm.
It is important for one to also learn the cultural requirements, like how do you approach an elder if you're young, from the opposite gender, where to approach them and when. That's true, Lillian. There are things we cannot divorce from, or we cannot change until we're able to see it from another person's point of view. So I agree with you, Lillian. In some communities, if you approach elders dressed in a particular manner, or if you approach the Muslim community dressed in a particular manner,
absolutely,
they will clearly not give you an audience. So the way we present ourselves truly does matter, and the timing.
Yes.
And yes, so that really matters, and I agree with you, Lillian. So Dr. Gidua, any final remarks before we end this particular session?
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you so much. I've posted the link, so please, everybody, just feel free to click on it in the chat. I've shared it with all panelists and all the attendees, just so that you can navigate that page. You'll see a lot of things, including how many airstrips you have in Kenya that you didn't know. People knew only like, yeah. Tell you how many places you can take off from in Kenya. It's a very interesting and resourceful website because it gives you data that you didn't really even think to look up, huh? And I've learned a lot about our country just through looking at that resource. But as we end, I thank you so much again for this opportunity to share with us. And of course, I'm not the expert in this area. I'm just a student of this pandemic as well. And from where I sit in my practice of mental health, I'm learning a lot also about the needs of healthcare workers and our people. And I think that what you're doing, Dr. Kalondu, Dr. Kinuthi, and the team is really commendable, because giving healthcare workers this platform to express themselves and to share and to listen and to learn is really important, just to give them that morale to continue working and to continue serving this country the way they're doing. And with regards to today's presentation, the last thing I can say is that, look, our culture is dynamic. Our spirituality is also dynamic. And that moving forward, I think what COVID has done for us, it will also change our culture of being told things from the West. And to me, that's the biggest take home that I've gotten. That now we're not looking for help from the US or from Italy or from Japan or from China. It's forcing us to come up with solutions from inside ourselves. What do we, as Kenyan healthcare providers, have to offer our people? What do we, as practitioners in whatever field we're in, have to offer our people? It's no longer about copying and pasting what has been done somewhere else. It's about us being innovative. And I love the fact it has pushed us to really investigate our own cultures, our own beliefs, and our thoughts. Is it necessary for us to be taken advantage of? Because sometimes what you mentioned, Dr. Kalondu, is important. Is it about following a specific preacher or a specific cleric, or is it about following God? Is it about our culture being backward, or is it about it being very, very balanced? So I think there are many questions it leaves us with, but what I aim to do many times when we do the presentations is not to give a definitive answer, but to actually start a conversation that says, let us start thinking down this direction. For me, I'm really thankful, I'm grateful, and I'm so humbled that you've given me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gidua. We truly appreciate that you always find time to come on short notice to teach us and always enlighten us. Some of these things we probably wouldn't have thought them through. As healthcare workers, sometimes we might not have the luxury to think towards the mental health aspect, but I like the fact that you have time, you always get time to come and enlighten us. And even as we start seeing our patients, we are thinking about them in totality. We're not just seeing the cold that they've come with or the wound that they have. We are now starting to get an overall picture of the patient. So thank you so much. You really opened up our minds during this time, and we appreciate that. We truly appreciate. Victor is saying that we need to involve all parties of interest as we implement key issues of public interest, and I agree with you, Victor. We all have a role to play in this society. So sometimes the key stakeholders or the people who make the decisions might not be able to get up to the ground level. But there's some roles which, as healthcare workers in the public health aspect or even in the clinical matters, we still have a role of enlightening our patients. And right now, this is the time to actually just highlight some of this issue to the patient, even just the fact that they can seek mental health assistance, which probably they didn't have back then. This is the time to highlight our patients about the overall things that we're learning. So thank you so much. So thank you, Dr. Gidua. Once again, thank you, Dr. Kiludia, for always getting in touch with Dr. Gidua.
Thank you.
Yes, so now I'd like to address the issue of the CPDs from the participants' comments. And I'm saying we still have a challenge with the PPB members from PPB. I don't have a conclusive answer as to what is happening, because once the token system was introduced, it was supposed to streamline the process. It was supposed to be easier for you. So allow me to bring a member of the team that has been working on the CPD points for the PPB members of PPB next week, Monday session, so that they can just highlight or give you feedback on what exactly has been going on, the challenges they've been experiencing, and what we can do better. I'm saying people are saying they've been sending emails and they're not being responded to. I will also follow up on that. Now, the email system, the one for KNH Pharmacy goes to the team that is working on that in KNH Pharmacy, but the one for KNH Research comes directly to the KNH Research and Programs Office. So we will follow up on that email for the CPD KNH Pharmacy and find out what exactly is going on and whether they've had time outside their busy schedule to scan through your emails and respond to them. So we will follow up on that. But we truly apologize to the people who've not yet gotten their points. We truly apologize. We will find out. And Jacqueline Ocheng, you're saying the webinars, KNH webinars since Monday do not appear at the PPB portal. We will also follow up on that and find out what is happening on that end. Okay, Dr. Gidwa, before you go, there's a comment from Fidelia.
Okay.
And Fidelia is saying, thank you very much for this forum. I've been a faithful attendee from Nakuru working in a private institution. I'm not able to view the question and answer section. I would like to view Dr. Gidwa's link. Is it possible to find a way of sharing this link?
Yes.
With us so that we're able to.
Yes, I can do that. I think I did it in the chat.
Or can you share your screen? If it's on your screen,
yes,
you can just share your screen briefly. We have 3 more minutes and then you'll be able to see it.
What I can do, let me put it. I'll even show you how the page looks like, I think. Huh?
Yes.
So at least, yeah, let me share the screen.
So Fidelia, the screen is being shared right now. You'll be able to see that.
Yes, there you go. So I've shared it, and it is done by the Central Intelligence Agency. Don't worry, they're not collecting intelligence about you. It's actually the section which is the library. Yes. And so the link is www.cia.gov library. But in fact, if you really want to know how to search for it, just say the World Fact Book, which is the one that I'm pointing to right now, and then you point to the country Kenya. So when you come, you see it gives you a lot of information, like even your flag, of course, the geographical map. Then it has very many topics: introduction, geography, people and society, government, economy, energy. So if you want to see that I was not just saying funny things, if I click on people and society, you'll see that the population is 53,527,936, which is July 2020 estimate, which is exactly what I put in my notes. Huh? And also I said we're 27th in the world. Guess what? If you look at this, it's written it's 27th in the world. If I click on that 27, what happens? A list comes up from the most populous country, which is China, India, US, all the way down. And look here at number 27, who is here? Kenya. Okay. All these populations are July 2020 estimates, and it tells you who is more populous than you. It's very interesting because it actually drives home some things. Some things we think we're better at than other people in the world. we are worse than, it actually gives you a proper measure. Because you see, as I said, the United States government is interested in the whole world because of the development work they do all over the world, and they need to know who they're supporting. Even they even know your ethnic groups more than you know your own ethnic groups, by the way, Dr. Kalondu. Can you see? It
Yes,
tells you
yes,
the
I can see it.
percentages. It gives you percentages, things we didn't even know. It even tells you about your religion. Remember, I talked about 85.5%?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I meant. And then in brackets, it tells you Protestants, Catholic, Evangelical, African institutional churches, all that stuff. Muslim 10.9. It gives you demographic profile, tells you who we are. Look at the age that I was talking about. 0 to 14 years, 38.71 male. And that is the male, and then no, 38.71%. But to 15, it's about 20.5. So if you add 20.45 and that, it actually comes to what the percentage I was telling you,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we do. So I make sure that I'm very careful about the data that I quote,
Yeah.
because I know it's very easy to mislead people if you just quote things that you cannot actually refer or show them,
Mm.
So it's a practice that I've made to do that. So it even tells you your population growth rate, okay,
Yeah.
2.2%, tells you your sex ratio, how many more men. The people who keep saying that they're more there are more men than women, there are more women than men at ECG7. Let me tell you, statistics will prove you wrong. Okay, it's actually not the same. It's actually very equal. It's like 1-to-1, by the way. Yeah? Actually 1-to-1. In fact, it's 1.02 men per woman. So it's actually even more men than women.
Mm.
So it's very life expectancy. We expect to live to 67.3 as men, and women 70.6. It tells you all of that information about your country, which will be important for planning purposes, as well as even public health responses, if you really think about it. It tells you
Wow.
that you have now, this is interesting for you as healthcare workers, 1.4 beds per 1,000 people. Can you imagine? So all of these things. So yeah. So next time we can have a chat about some of these things. The more we engage, the more we can actually look at some of this data mining. It's very interesting stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gideon, for that. Fidelia, I believe you now have the source. Good. I can see you've confirmed that you have it, and I hope everyone else has the source. So let's quote the right data. We thank you very much for that enlightenment. I didn't know about that site, but thank you for that.
Great. You're welcome.
Yes. So tomorrow we will not have a session. Tomorrow is a public holiday. So we'll not have a session. So we'll see you on Monday. Thank you very much for finding time to attend this session and for listening in. Dr. Kerama Samuel, I can see you're giving us an update on the PPB portal for CPD. They've introduced a token claim section. I believe this is almost sorted. Thank you for that. We will follow up on that and find out how far the process is. So thank you for that. Thank you, Dr. Oscar. Thank you to all the participants for attending. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate the comments that you give us on the comment section. Have a good afternoon and enjoy your long weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.